we find that two nephews return to the great house. Not exactly return, but they are brought back. They don't come back, they are brought back. The first nephew returns, or rather is brought back in 1943, and the second nephew is brought back more recently. They are brought back by plane and train and military truck even before the telegrams reach the house. And when are they brought back? Let us take a look at the lines again. And was brought back in plane and train and military truck even before the telegrams reached on a perfectly good, chatty afternoon. Chatty means cheerful, lively, happy, vibrant. Nobody expected such things to happen. Even the telegrams have not arrived. And here the nephew arrives. The nephew is not coming back. He has not come back. He is brought back. Just imagine the shock, the consternation, the gloom generated by the incidents. The nephew being brought back. And in the first instance, the body of the nephew is half gnawed by desert foxes. Thus, A.K. Ramanujan has provided small-scale reflections on a great house with a spectacular closure. The ultimate example, the final example, the most brilliant example of how whatever goes out of the so-called great house returns to the great house, maybe not in the same condition in which it went out of the house. A poem communicates the totality of its meaning, the totality of its semantic significance, not only through its verbal logic, not only through the logic of its lines, but also through the hints that it generates from the elements embedded in its structure. If you analyze the present poem carefully, you find that there are quite a few elements embedded in its narrative structure, elements which generate suggestions of decay, decline, degeneration, disease, and death. Let us try to identify the most important of these elements. Lame wandering cows, unread library books, silverfish, epilepsies in the blood, prostitute song, voiceless cook, short-lived idiots, dying ancestors, or perhaps dying ancestors rattle in the throats, half gnawed by desert foxes, an incident on the border. The poem begins with the words, "Sometimes I think." When the poem begins, the speaker is very much alive and he thinks. If he does not think, this poem would not have come into being. But when the poem ends, we find two dead bodies arriving at the great house. Two nephews arrive as corpses at the great house. Thus, the movement of the poem, the thematic movement of the poem, is from life to death. And the thematic trajectory of the poem passes through disablement, disease, decline, and degeneration in order to arrive at death. It is quite true that the great house, which stands at the center of the thematic structure of the poem, is very much a house made of brick and mortar. But the house also operates as a symbol. The great house could very well be a symbol for Sanatana Dharma, for Hinduism. You must remember that A.K. Ramanujan rejected the religion of his family, the religion of his ancestors, as a very young man, and he was able to see nothing but decline, degeneration, corruption, hypocrisy, contradiction in the Hindu religion. Hinduism is a religion which allows everybody in, everything in, and does not allow anything to go out. Thus, the great house could be a perfect symbol for the Hindu religion, which accepts everything from everybody and which has an ever expanding corpus of beliefs, customs, and rituals. The great house in the poem could very well be a symbol for India itself or for the Indian civilization, because the Indian civilization has the capacity to absorb everything that comes its way, has the capacity to accept everything and integrate whatever it accepts into itself. The Hindu religion does not have streamlined beliefs, and its corpus of beliefs is always in a very disorganized state, is always a clutter, is never properly arranged. Thus, the great house in the poem symbolizes India, India's dominant religion, Hinduism, and above all, the Indian civilization. Let us take a look at the stylistic component of the poem. Small scale reflections on a great house is undoubtedly a gem of a poem from the technical point of view. Every single word in the poem is justified. Every single punctuation mark in the poem is justified. The poem consists of 91 lines. It is organized in stanzas of 3 lines each. And after every set of stanzas, every set of 4 stanzas, the poet places a stanza of a single line stanza. Thus, every set of 3 line stanzas, every set of 4 3-line stanzas is separated from the next set of stanzas by a single line stanza. Small scale reflections on a great house is a free verse poem. This means that the poem has discarded the metered line, the regular rhyme scheme, and the stanzaic pattern. Of course, the present poem does have stanzas, but they are not traditional verse stanzas. The poem does not make use of the metered line. The poem does not have a regular rhyme scheme. We find sharply etched images in the poem. 2 images in particular stand out. One is that of cows being made pregnant in broad daylight under the direct supervision of the elders of the family. The second image is that of arriving corpses. 2 nephews of the family arrive at the great house as corpses, and they arrive on days which can be called chatty. Chatty means happy, friendly, lively, delightful. The poet skillfully manipulates linear length. He positions longer lines in the midst of shorter lines in order to get the desired effect. We have already discussed the title of the poem in some detail, and if you are asked to carry out an overview of the stylistic component of the poem, you have to include that discussion in your overview and demonstrate how the title of the poem is extremely appropriate for the same, for the poem. The poet makes use of a variety of literary devices in his poem. One of these is enjambment. In enjambment, The matter of one stanza is allowed to flow into the next stanza. There is repeated use of enjambment in the poem, and as a result, the poem is shaped into an organic whole. Examples of enjambment are how the first stanza of the poem flows into the second stanza. Come in every day to lose themselves. The poet makes frequent use of alliteration, where the same letter is repeated, and thus a special effect is generated. Examples are short lived idiots, rattle in the throat,